Hi, Babushka. Whew. I have been working like you wouldn't believe and thinking about what I was going to talk about with you next during all the work and trying to get stuff done. I've been listening to this music here. It's going to highlight a little side story that I'm going to put in. And it's going to have to do with what was going on during all those arguments I had with your grandfather, John. That's the Starland Vocal Band. One of the best albums. This one they made here has Afternoon Delight on it. It's one of the best albums I think ever made. And I was listening to a lot of that old school music from my childhood after my mom, your grandmother Sarah, had died at my guardian's house. And they always wondered, why, why do you listen to this stuff? And I'm like, well, why not? It relaxes me. I was in a phase of grieving over losing my mom. There were times when I was numb. There were times when I just couldn't sleep at night. And some of my dreams, I could see her face. And I remember reaching out to hug her. And she would kind of fade away in the distance. Bizarre stuff. I don't know if it was just magical thinking going on in my mind. Who knows? But I just got home, and also I wanted to do a special shout out. Remember that candy that I sent you with the care package? I sent you a little bit of money too. I hope you used it. You deserve it. And I hope that your training with your new job also goes well. I'm so proud of you. Everything is going to be fine, one step at a time. But I wanted to do a special shout out there to Sean. You just came back from South Carolina, and yeah, you visited your mom, Dottie. And Dottie, if you watch this too, thank you, ma'am. You're so awesome. And your daughter, her and I are both Capricorn. I don't think that means anything to you. But Sean was saying that you grew up with a name that people like to tease. And it would always get on your nerves. And I'm right there with you. I've been called everything from Ding Bell to Smellabella to Bella Lugosi to the reptile or to the turtle. And, I've gotten used to it over time. It's just part of life, I guess. So, but I can see how that can be really nerve-wracking. But Sean's mother, Babushka, because I sent Sean off with that candy, she gave me a gift. And Babushka, you know how I have such a fetish for aprons. This is going to go next to my prized possession, my Coca-Cola apron, which I wear with pride every year, especially when I make my holiday candy and treats and stuff. But Sean's mom sent her back with this as a gift back to me. And I just wanted to say thank you. This is like the best. And I'm going to wear it with pride and with love. And a special thank you for you. This is wonderful. And in a way, it kind of ties to this side story about, oh, hi, Gus. He wants to get on the action here too. But it ties in with this side story going back to 1988. And Babushka, you remember a friend of mine. She's the one where you stayed on her and her parents' farm. She was actually in a type of transition with her husband. They were newly married and they had bought a plot of land where they were going to set up their house. But she also stayed on her parents' farm. And then her father, he built houses for a living, and she would actually help him. That was her job, to help her save up money for school and whatnot. She was actually the first teenager I had met back when we were teenagers in 1988 at the new school in Houston. Before we get on to this story, I want to share a poem. I read bits and pieces of poetry from this gentleman. He moved to the United States, actually, from the country Lebanon. And he was into faith and spirituality, a wonderful writer. This book of poetry, it's called The Prophet, and it came out in the around 1900, 1920s. I believe there was a publishing of it that was really special in the early 1920s. But his name was Kahlil Gibran. One of my favorite poems out of this. It's a whole story, kind of like Homer's Iliad or Odyssey. But it's all poems that tie in to a story of people asking this old man, who they call the prophet, questions about life. So this one in particular, it's on giving. That's its title. So here we go. Then said a rich man, "Speak to us of giving." And he answered, "You give little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give yourself that you truly give. For what are your possessions but things you keep and guard? For fear you may need them tomorrow. And tomorrow, what shall tomorrow bring? To the overprudent dog burying bones in the trackless sand as he follows the pilgrims to the holy city. And what is fear of need but need itself? Is not dread of thirst? Your well is full, thirst that is unquenchable? There are those who give little of the much which they have, and they give it for recognition, and their children desire makes their gifts unwholesome. And there are those who have little and yet give it all. These are the believers in life and the bounty of life, and their coffer is never empty. There are those who give with joy, and that joy is their reward. And there are those who give with pain, and that pain is their baptism. And there are those who give and know not pain in giving, nor do they seek joy, nor give with mindfulness of virtue. They give as the yonder valley, the myrtle breathes its fragrance into space, though the hands of such as these God speak, and from behind their eyes he smiles upon the earth. It is well to give when asked, but it is better to give unasked, through understanding. And Babushka, you can replace the word God with goddess. Of course you can. You can replace it with anything that fills your heart and makes you happy. A wonderful poem. So we're going to get into this young lady. We continued our friendship for quite a while, Babushka, until after you had moved away. And I think I'm going to get ready to contact her just to speak out, because a lot of my old friends from Oregon, a few of them have been popping up and reaching out to me, and that's great. And what's even better, it's been the good ones, so it's absolutely fantastic. And even though I'm busy working, every moment, even if it's just a 5-minute hello, that's precious to me. And it reminds me to keep on keeping on. So, her name is Rosemary. And my first day at that new high school, I felt lonely and alone and scared to death. And on top of that, this particular high school was actually a rival school to my previous high school in Burnside. I remember going to that school a couple of times, actually when playing volleyball, south of Salem, across the bridge. It's actually, I don't know if it still is, but it was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most churches per capita for the population in the country. And ironically, most all the churches were Protestant. The Catholic church that I was trying to go to was on the outskirts of town, as was the Mormon ward, their type of church. It was all on the outskirts. And then ironically, I would eventually joke with the people that I met over there that there was a tavern or bar next to each church. Kind of funny. It says a lot, doesn't it? But this high school I thought was really, really odd when I would go visit. My old high school, the school colors were really easy, especially for the 80s. All you had to do was wear a pair of blue jeans and a t-shirt, because the school colors were dark blue and white. And the mascot was the wolves. Well, this new school in Houston, the colors were orange and black. Some people might like that. I thought going right into the building, it was blinding, especially the gym. And the mascot was a reptile. So, kind of weird, you know. If you like medieval stuff, I suppose it would be really cool. And remember, Babushka, a few years ago when I sent you some little trinkets of heirloom jewelry, including, you know, your grandma's wedding band for you, and also, you know, for your husband too, for the both of you. When you got married, I sent you my old school ring with that insignia of that reptilian on the side of it. Do you remember? And on the other side, you know, there's a paintbrush, because that's what I was into when I went to school. I remember visiting there and playing sports, and I remember the Mexican girls who played volleyball. It wasn't all of them, but a few of them in particular had a special hatred for that town. And it never, ever dawned on me as to why. I was so ignorant, you know, such a young fool. And I could not see underneath the surface of a few things. I think after growing up as a child in Humbleton, for a while there, and even well into the 90s on certain issues, I just did not want to see, underneath the surface of a few things, because I had already seen underneath the surface of the town I grew up in as a little girl, and it was just too much to bear. But my first day of school was actually in the middle of the fall quarter. Actually, it was toward the end. It was right before the holiday vacation. And I was stared at in my homeroom. It was a type of advanced history. The instructor, he's a very nice gentleman. There were a few desks available, but I got glares. For the first time in a long time, there were some glares there. So I think a lot of them were upperclassmen in that classroom, and the cliques and whatnot. And here I come in with a white, blousy poet shirt on and a vest and baggy black pants. I think I had my chola suspenders on too, and my hair was all one length, kind of layered a little bit over part of my bangs, and it was all black. And I looked different. I knew that. I really didn't care, but I could see it was a bunch of preps. And I hesitated for a moment. And then this young girl, she scooted out a desk that was empty. She pointed it to me and kind of nudged it. She was sitting behind it, nudged it with her foot, and then kind of pointed to me with her pencil to sit there in front of her. And I did. And we took the class very seriously. At that point, I wanted to do well. All I wanted to do was concentrate on my studies and get a decent job, And the job that I wanted in particular, that I was pining over, I kept checking with them like every week if there was availability. And it was a restaurant, well known in the neighborhood, kind of a diner. Some people would call it a dive, but actually it was quite popular, and it was right across the street from the county courthouse, and it did get a lot of business. I wanted to stay focused on that. That was my goal, and to focus on my studies. Now, my guardians, actually my guardian and her husband, I don't know why it slips to refer him as my guardian, Bert. They had introduced me to some of their nieces, and these nieces were stepsisters to that boy I was telling you about in previous videos, Jason, the one who enlisted in the Navy. And he actually went to his physical training, his ROTC, over in Norfolk, Virginia. And we would write to each other, and we had goals about him getting leave, which he was able to do for the future. He knew who to talk to for coming back and visit and take me to dances and whatnot. But the nieces were okay, and I'll mention them again in other side stories because it kind of explains a lot of things. I liked them, especially in the beginning. One in particular was a year older than me, and she was okay. I tried being nice to her, and I truly was grateful for her because she did show me around. But I did notice one thing in particular. She was friends with a nice young woman who was her age, who happened to be a little bit overweight. And we're going to call her Amy. Amy would criticize her and tease her behind her back. That was a red flag. And I wanted to ignore it, but I just couldn't ignore it. I made a note of it, and I was nice to that friend of hers. But we'll go back here to that first day of school with Rosemary, Rose. Babushka, do you remember? She's the one who taught you how to ride horses. And when I would go down and visit, it would mainly be to her house or to her parents' house and farm. Beautiful people. After class, after the bell rang, she introduced herself. And she goes, I know you. We played volleyball against each other over at Burnside. And I'll show you around. And I always liked you. And I was always impressed with your moves. And I'm like, why? I was just on the JV level. And she explained to me that she had moved on onto the varsity team and also played basketball and was in the Future Farmers of America and other clubs. But it was those compliments that made me feel comfortable. And I complimented her too. Do you remember Babushka? She had the longest red hair. It was down to her waist. And it took me a while to convince her. But sometimes she would let me braid or play with her hair. She was such a tomboy. But a natural beauty in that sense, and made me feel comfortable about myself. We celebrate giving, right? Well, she introduced me to some other girls, and a young man in particular who was actually one of the stars on the tennis team, and he ended up going to state, believe it or not. We all belonged, well, she introduced me to the First Christian Church. And it was good timing too, because I was not happy going to that new Catholic church. For one thing, I liked the priest. He seemed like a very nice man. And I liked most of the congregation. It was okay. And the church was actually in the middle of being refurbished. So instead of the main part of the cathedral with the main altar and all of that, they were redoing it all. So we had to have the Mass in a separate room that felt more like sitting in a gym. And that was okay. No big deal. It doesn't even matter. But I did notice my guardian and her husband and certain relatives of theirs. All they would do was nitpick and complain. And then, compare this and that and the other thing. And there wasn't even some real talk, And then I was questioning my faith. I had been studying a lot. And Babushka, you know this. I studied a lot on the history of the Tudors and also the history of the Reformation. So, I had an argument, actually, with Gina's mother-in-law. She was a nice woman, kind of the head of the family. Her husband was a very nice man. She sold real estate for a living back in the day when she was young. Her and her husband both did. She had originally come from Georgia and then over to California and then up to Oregon. They also had a very small sheep farm. And Jason before he left for the Navy, he showed me around. He showed me all of this. And they had a few horses and whatnot too, a few goats. But I had an argument with her because she was so convinced that the body and blood of Christ, when the priests bless it, it actually is the physical body and blood of Jesus Christ. Now, Babushka, I know you're not into that religious stuff. You probably find it comical. I'm sure the only time you even look into it is when you're reading your Gothic novels, or you're reading or watching your Jane Austen stuff, and that's all right. But I told her, no, it's just symbolic. That's all it is. She had the audacity to tell me that I was a sinner. And then I had the audacity in front of other people to tell her, ma'am, you don't even know. And I walked away. There was just something about her. But it was okay. I respected her, to most points, and would open the door for her and refer to her as ma'am, and would always offer to clean up and stuff. And, she had her hopes for me, I'm sure. And maybe at times she may have been a little bit disappointed, but she had a whole litter of grandkids, I was just there along for the ride for a few years. It was no big deal. But Rosemary, she introduced me to one of the best youth pastors and his wife. We're going to call him Rick. For Rick Springfield, the singer. He reminded me of him so much. Wonderful man. And the youth group was very awesome. And it was more not talking so much about religion, but about talking about our childhood past, things that concerned us. He was more like a counselor. And he had a great sense of humor, and he absolutely loved my voice. And he loved what I had to say, and we would actually get into some really good, healthy debates. His nickname for me, ironically, was Yoda, and he's like, are you bilingual? 'Cause you say or write things a little bit backwards. Like you might speak another language or something. And I said, no, I don't know what it is. This was before I figured out, and that's another story we'll get into in the future, that I was dyslexic, and I just didn't realize it. So when I would write things down, like for term papers and reports, oftentimes I would have to go over it again and go over it again, and I just got used to it. But yeah, he would tell me, he's like, you sound just like Yoda. And I'm like, thank you. And I would answer him back just like that. But Rosemary was fantastic. There was one thing, though. In the future, she had fallen in love with a young man who was actually a freshman when she was a senior. They went to homecoming and prom together. People would often criticize her because they would go out together, and sometimes she would have to sneak behind her parents' back. And yeah, they would go out drinking together. But instead of going home, a little drunk to hear the wrath of her father, and he was not one to talk, by the way, I would convince my guardians that she would spend the night with me. even in the future, by the time I did have a job, I didn't care. I'd have her stay upstairs with me. I had my small room, which was like a little loft, and then there was also a spare bedroom. And she'd be with me to sober up, where she could be safe. Some of the church members would criticize that and would also try and criticize her father because he wasn't much of a church-going guy. And I would argue, especially because sometimes they would try and bring them up as a subject in youth group or in crowds in the church to criticize. I would always put my foot down for her, especially for what she did for me. And guess what? I don't know if you remember this, Babushka, but she's a Gemini, just like you. Imagine that. What a wonderful thing. And a wonderful gift, because she didn't give me anything materialistic. She gave me her heart and her trust. Oh, and by the way, when I came out of the closet later on, we'll fast forward this to about 1990, 91. Actually, it was your father who really outed me, and that's another story. But when I came out of the closet as being bisexual or demisexual, she told me I always knew. And another friend of ours, the guy who ended up going state in tennis, well, he was gay. I think he's still with the one lover he found when he graduated high school. Yeah, since 1990. Isn't that cool? But she told me that she always knew, and she respected me no matter what for who I am. So, anyways, I gotta wrap this up. Gus is pining for attention, and I think he wants a couple of treats and some fresh water before I go to bed, and I gotta get ready to go to work tonight. Anywho, I just wanted to point that out, and then again do that special shout out to Sean and her mom, Dottie. Love you all, and don't forget to ring the bell. I'll see you all later, okay? Take care. Goodbye.